Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we are diving deep into a fascinating and, let's be honest, kind of controversial topic. We're looking at the actual architecture of the brain to ask a huge question. Are male and female brains really built differently? Let's see what the science says.
So here it is, the big one. Are male and female brains wired differently? I mean, when you strip away culture and you get past all the social conditioning, are there, on average, any real fundamental differences in how our brains are structured? It's definitely a complex topic, but, a whole lot of research is pointing to some pretty interesting patterns that are absolutely worth exploring. So to really get our heads around this, we're gonna break it down. We're gonna look at 4 key areas. First, we'll check out the brain's actual wiring. Then we'll move on to its emotional centers. After that, we'll talk about the chemical fuel that runs the whole system. And finally, we'll look at the literal building blocks that make it all up.
Okay, first up, the brain's wiring diagram. The best way to think about this is like a massive, super complex network of highways. Scientists call this white matter, and it's what connects all the different regions of your brain. And right here is where we see one of the most foundational differences.
This is so cool. What researchers have found are basically 2 different wiring strategies. On average, the female brain has more connections that run between the 2 hemispheres, connecting the logical left side with the more creative, intuitive right side. It's like building bridges across a river. But in contrast, the male brain tends to show stronger connections running from the front to the back, but within each hemisphere. So what does this actually mean in the real world? Well, that cross-hemisphere wiring in the female brain is often linked to things like multitasking, or being able to integrate analytical thought with emotional intuition really well. Meanwhile, that front-to-back wiring in the male brain often lines up with really strong spatial skills and an incredible ability to focus, laser-like, on a single task.
All right, next up, let's zoom in on the brain's emotional centers, because it turns out it's not just about the wiring. The actual size and the activity level of key areas that handle things like memory and stress, well, they can show some pretty distinct patterns too.
So let's start with the hippocampus. You can think of it as the brain's head librarian. It files away all our memories. And on average, this part of the brain is larger in women. It's super important for things like verbal memory, remembering the exact words someone said, and for picking up on subtle social cues. And this might just explain a pretty common experience. Some researchers think that having a larger hippocampus could be one reason why women, on average, might be able to recall the super specific emotional and verbal details of something that happened years ago, whether it was a great conversation or, a social slate. Now, let's flip to the other side of the coin, the amygdala. This is the brain's alarm system. It's the fight or flight center, and this area is typically larger in men. This might influence how the brain responds to stress or danger, maybe priming it for a more immediate action-oriented response. Okay, so we've looked at the hardware, we've looked at the wiring, now let's talk about the fuel. The chemical drivers, basically hormones, that are flowing through the brain play a huge, huge role in shaping our behaviors, our instincts, and our priorities. And this table really breaks it down nicely. When a brain is running more on testosterone, it tends to be geared toward things like competition and figuring out social hierarchies. And that can really fuel that classic fight or flight response to stress. On the other hand, a system running with more estrogen and oxytocin, that often prioritizes social connection and harmony. This leads to what some scientists call a tend and befriend response, the instinct to reach out, connect, and talk things through when you're stressed. All right, for our final piece of the puzzle, let's get down to the brain's literal building blocks, gray matter and white matter. It's pretty simple. If white matter is all the cables connecting everything, then gray matter is the processing centers at the ends of those cables. So here's the key distinction. On average, men tend to have more gray matter, more of those localized processing centers. This is sometimes linked to being really good at solving a specific, focused problem, like a math equation or a puzzle. Women, on the other hand, typically have more white matter, more of those cables that connect everything. This might be what helps the brain transfer and integrate information from all over really, really quick. So let's wrap this all up. We've seen 4 key differences in brain architecture, again, on average. First, connectivity. More connections between the hemispheres for women, and more within them for men. Second, emotional centers. A larger hippocampus, or memory center, in women, versus a larger amygdala, or alarm center, in men. Third, the chemicals. An estrogen and oxytocin focus for women driving social connection, versus a testosterone focus for men driving competition. And finally, the building blocks. More white matter cables in women versus more gray matter processors in men. And that brings us to the single most important question of all. It's so critical to remember that these are just blueprints. They're averages across huge populations, not destiny for any one person. The real magic, the real story, is how these biological tendencies interact with our unique lives, our experiences, our culture, and our choices. Because that is what truly makes us who we are. Thanks so much for watching.